thanks you guys for being here. We are like kind of in it now. A little bit lighter crowd tonight. I'm not surprised, right? Like all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is not totally a piece of cake. Yeah. How many of you struggled with this? Feel like you struggle? Okay.
Especially at the beginning.
Okay.
To get into it.
You have struggle plus,
What's that?
not terrible, but
Yeah.
it's challenging.
Challenging. Good. And hopefully by the end, challenging is good. Like we like a good workout for our minds, right? Hopefully this isn't discouraging. We'll go through each of these. I was thinking tonight kind of we'll look at our characters, if that makes sense. We're covering a lot of material in the sense that we're going through chapters 2 through 8 tonight because we missed. So sorry about last week. Well, I know, but we've got like Lent sort of a bookend for us, right? And I would extend it the week after that, but Patty and I are going to be out of town. Our 25th wedding anniversary coming up. I know, right? We look so young, but no, we're excited. We're excited about that. Well, so again, like looking at this, Patty was saying something to me the other day, and just talking about these characters and these conversations, and she was going, gosh, this just sounds like so much of the conversations I'm hearing these days. Would you agree? I mean, you see here kind of the loop that people are stuck in, right? There's this great, I don't have the quote for you, but G.K. Chesterton in his book Orthodoxy, he starts off by talking about lunacy. And he makes the statement in there that it's not the artists that go crazy, it's the chess players. And hey, Carson. And so with that in mind, he's saying it's the people that have it all figured out. But it's not that they just have it figured out, but they've like created almost this like perfect circle of logic that, as it turns out, is really small, but they hold on to it with such certainty. It's like they cannot be moved. They've got this like thing figured out, right? He says that the artists are just trying to get their heads into the heavens, which is kind of an appropriate metaphor here. He says the chess players are trying to get the heavens into their head, and their heads split. And so this idea of trying to somehow control all of that, and we see here in some of our writing, some of the solid people that we're introduced to are encouraging almost a childlikeness in the people, encouraging a humility, a dependence, a softness there, right? And what you see instead is this rigidity that's made people really incapable of repentance. Repentance has got this willingness to kind of have your mind changed, right? But these are people that are so stuck. And like I was saying before, I think for Lewis, these probably are people that he knew. Many of them probably are reflective of himself, right? He's going to talk about the bishop, the intellectual, spiritual man in there, right? And you get the feeling like if this wasn't him, these were conversations he was having with people, right? And in this, where ultimately in the end, we see for Lewis, the kind of heartbreaking reality of people that will not turn. They just won't. And, maybe when we think of Scripture, we might think of this idea of the hardness of heart, right? If the heart, like Dallas Willard would say, the heart is your will. It's where you choose from, right? And that this heart can get hardened. In some ways, it's this inability for it to bend, or maybe when it does, eventually it breaks, it becomes brittle, right? So how do we keep this soft heart? And repentance has that sort of texture to it. So here's my lovely picture of Greytown. And then this picture of Lewis that I just love. I'm going to repeat this slide that we did the first time because I thought this is from the introduction, but to me gets at kind of the heart of what we're talking about and is important to keep in mind. Evil can be undone, but it cannot develop into good. Time does not heal it. The spell must be unwound bit by bit, with backward mutters of it dissevering power, or else not. It is still either or. If we insist on keeping hell or even earth, we shall not see heaven. If we accept heaven, we shall not be able to retain even the smallest and most intimate souvenirs of hell. And so this idea of how these two worlds aren't just opposed to one another, but what we're going to see in some ways is they're moving away from each other. That heaven has got this sort of expansiveness opening up. And there's what we'll see eventually within hell. Even though it's spreading, it's shrinking. It's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. Anyway, we'll see this Sunday, we're in Hebrews 12, he's going to talk about the two cities, the city of earth and the city of heaven. And in some ways, that's kind of what Lewis is playing with as well. That the city, that hell or Greytown in some ways is just this extension of earth moving that direction, right? And that heaven ends up becoming this journey into a whole separate reality, which we get to see in our chapter, the bus ride that unfolds. So this, I thought we'd start just kind of with a reflection a little bit on the bus ride, because you start to get in chapter 2 kind of the drone view of Greytown. The bus, startlingly, doesn't just drive off, it flies up into the air. And there they are looking down, observing all of this. And they talk about this nature here of this expansion that's happening, and which is happening out of the sort of quarrelsome nature of people. Again, it's not like these behaviors are somehow so unique in hell, right? You look at this and go, oh, this sounds kind of like what we experience here. He says this, the trouble is that they're so quarrelsome. As soon as anyone arrives, he settles in some street. Before he's been there 24 hours, he quarrels with his neighbor. Before the week is over, he's quarreled so badly he decides to move. Very likely he finds the next street empty because all the people there have quarreled with their neighbors and moved. If so, he settles in. If by any chance the street is full, he goes further. But even if he stays, it makes no odds. He's sure to have another quarrel pretty soon, and then he'll move on again. Finally, he'll move right out to the edge of the town and build a new house. You see, it's easy here. You've only got to think a house, and there it is. That's how the town keeps on growing. Anyway, why do you think? I mean, this is Lewis using his imagination, but it's an interesting description of hell. And what about this? Is there anything in that kind of idea? Because I think in some ways it's very unique, but I guess I'm wondering, why does he describe hell as this sort of quarrelsome expansion? Does that make sense to you? Does that fit as you kind of think about that idea? Do you resonate with that? Is that an okay question?
Tell me, do you think in some ways that is the expansiveness of getting the desires that you think will satisfy you? You keep dreaming them and they keep getting bigger and bigger, and they don't actually satisfy, but it's like you've used this analogy of you become the first class flyer, and that's just who you are now. And
yes,
it doesn't really do it, but that's almost an empty house you're building for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I read it, was and it reminds me a little bit of that Romans, I think it's from Romans 1, where it's you're going to be given over to your desires at some point if those become ultimate. And I don't know if
that's really good. No, I think that's right. And in some ways it's the pride that sees yourself as superior to these people, right? As you talk about the first class flyer, you're like, of course I get on the plane first. I'm kind of better than all of these people, right? And you see that in the people that we're introduced to, where a number of them are going I'm not like these. Or he'll say to our narrator, we're not like all these other people, right? So you're there's, in some ways it's a judgment that keeps these people moving. Yeah, Michelle.
Just to go off what Travis said, the appreciation, the need, so many of these characters are they're focused so much on themselves. And I mean, that's reiterated later in later chapters, we don't actually focus on ourselves. There was some, quote we came to later, but it's all just very like entitled, vain. I need appreciation, right? There's all this. It's just such an echo of the self, and then which would be, the opposite is community,
Yeah.
right? And so it's almost like they get this so myopic that they're only focused on themselves, that they keep getting more and more estranged from everyone else.
Yes.
But I thought that a little further on in the chapter, I think actually maybe only a few lines down, I thought it was really interesting, that idea of, that it's scarcity that enables a society to exist. And
Yes.
so I just thought that was very interesting, like when they actually know their need. Like
Yes.
the problem, he said, the trouble is on page 13, they have no needs.
Mhm.
And
Right.
and then if they knew that they had need, then they wouldn't, then there'd be a scarcity, but a scarcity maybe in a good way,
Mhm.
because then they would know that they need each other, and they know they're humbled in that way.
That's right. That's right. No, and again, it's like trying to figure out, how do you control this community, right? And he's trying to create dependence or something like that. And you create it by having something that everybody wants, and everybody's like, all of a sudden, like you said, scarcity drives it, which you go, probably does. It's like FOMO is a great way to draw a crowd if everybody's afraid of missing out, right? But you're like, not sure that develops the healthiest community, but it does create maybe the appearance of it, right?
I'm sorry, but it's interesting. I just wanted to say, because in this sense, it almost seems like he's using it in a good way. Like,
yeah.
like that it is our need that draws us to each other, right, on this earthly plane.
Yes,
But in heaven, somehow,
that's great.
I was just really amazed at why you just have to think a house and it exists. Whereas in heaven, like everything is real, right?
Right.
And so I just,
Like we need some
I was
substance.
wondering why
Yeah.
you just have to think a house and it exists and how.
Oh, that's a great. Okay, real quick, I want to ask Kirk, and then we'll come back to that, because I think that's a really good question.
People are people. And I think this is the environment that you create when there's no peacemakers. All the peacemakers are in heaven. So there's no one to kind of, hey, come on, it's it's not, I don't
Yeah,
know. That's
right.
That's what I say.
All the peacemakers are repentant,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Well, let's with Michelle's question, because that's going to be important, right? I love that guy, because we're going to see him later trying to bring an apple back, right? That's him. And he's trying to come in. He's like, if I could just bring that apple back on the bus with me, right? Then I would then we could all come for the apple. Except he can't even lift this thing, right? He's like struggling to just have one. But this thing of solidness, right? And in some ways, you're like, you see man that is just a shadow of himself, right? And I think for Lewis, that was kind of the wraith, or these kind of things, is like, what became of man in the fall is he was stripped of his substance, and yet still possesses this creativity. And so he can still create like he was designed to create, right? This ability is this God-given ability, and yet in that brokenness, everything resembles himself, cut off from that source of truth, right? So all we create is the appearance of something without the substance. So it's a great metaphor, right? The house that can't keep the rain off, right? Or the meal that doesn't quench our hunger or doesn't satisfy. So I think in some ways that's kind of the metaphor, is this. We'll see here in just a second, and I love this, when they get to heaven, the light shines through, and for the first time he sees everybody, and then he sees himself, right? And it's just this like shocking moment of like, oh my gosh, well, the way Lewis puts it, well, okay, first off, before we get to that, one of my favorite little pieces in there is Napoleon, right? I think this is such an interesting, as Lewis is speculating, if he had wrote this 10 years later, this for sure would have been Hitler. I think he's taking this notorious character and going, what happens to that person in hell, right? And he's going, they're way out there. And so what I love about this is these guys, he kind of cleverly says they make this journey. It takes them like thousands of years to get out there to Napoleon. They finally find him. And what is he doing? He's pacing back and forth. Like left, right, never stopping for a moment. The two chaps watched him for about a year and he never rested, and muttering to himself all the time. It was Solt's fault. It was Ney's fault. It was Josephine's fault. It was the fault of the Russians. It was the fault of the English. Like that all the time. Never stopped for a moment. A little fat man, and he looked kind of tired, but he didn't seem able to stop. And in some way, you're like, this is very different than, let's say, the Lake of Fire or something like this, right? But in some ways, not to diminish those images, right? But these are images to us that are like conjuring up suffering. But Lewis is pointing to a different sort of suffering, which is like us imprisoned to ourselves, incapable of breaking, as it turns out, this cycle of blame. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. Well, you think, how many people do you know like that? It's not my fault, right? Think of all of our kids, right? Who did that? Well, I wasn't. They left this out, right? Like this, not my fault, not my fault. And kind of seeing again the cycle that turns. I liked this last sentence here where he says, well, this last little paragraph, as the light, they get there and the light starts shining in the windows. I think he opens one of the windows and somebody's like, put that down. It's like this bright light coming in. And he says, I glanced around the bus though the windows were closed and soon muffed. The bus was full of light. It was cruel light. I shrank from the faces and forms by which I was surrounded. They were all fixed faces. I love this. Full not of possibilities, but impossibilities. Is that a great statement? These are people full of impossibilities. Some gaunt, some bloated, some glaring with idiotic ferocity, some drowned beyond recovery in dreams. But all, in one way or another, distorted and faded. One had a feeling they might fall to pieces at any moment if the light grew much stronger. Then there was a mirror on the end of the wall of the bus. I caught sight of my own, and still the light grew. And this, I think for Lewis, again, as he's wrestling with this is in many ways a direct reference to John 1, right? Where he's going, the preference for the darkness over the light. What is that about? And I think for Lewis, he's going, it's about, in many ways, we'll see, about shame. That this becomes kind of the nature and part of the unrepentance is this withdrawing from that. Anyway, we get introduced right off the bat to the bright people. Chapter 3 is short. They park the bus, they get off and they see these people coming, some clothed, some not clothed, all radiant, shining. I was asking this just as we were starting, and just for fun, do any of you have a sense of like who might come meet you as you got off the bus?
Maybe some elves.
An elf? Yeah, maybe. Elrond. Maybe Tolkien would come. He'd be like, come on, Brett, let me help you in. I was thinking there's like two guys that I think believed in me before I believed in me. And one was this guy, Chris Davis. And when I was in high school, I did a leadership program. And for whatever reason, he was like, you're my guy. And at like a really kind of vulnerable stage where I thought, I was kind of convinced I wasn't. I also think like, I kind of hope Mark Metherall might like come help me in. He was a guy my age, but went to our church, and he was a Navy SEAL, and he ended up passing away in Afghanistan or Iraq. But anyway, somebody that I thought, oh, God took like a soldier home, because like new assignment, but somebody I very much respected. But do any of you have somebody that you're like, This would probably be the one that would like throw an arm out there and help you walk. Yeah. Yeah, nice. Yeah. Like, I bet that's true, you know, that sense. I mean, certainly Jesus is who we want to see first, right? But you're like, maybe mom will take you and be like, let me take you to Jesus' house. Anybody else have somebody like that?
I'd say my brother.
Yeah.
He's the one I prayed his name to receive.
Yeah. Isn't that cool? Yeah, I think they like have a special place, right? That they've like earned that in some ways. And some of this we see with some of the bright people, they're still like maybe working out their salvation. Like part of it is humbling for them maybe to have to come. We'll see one of the bright people's come in a way to with this posture of asking forgiveness, or at least healing the relationship. But these bright people come. Each one of them is significant. And each one of them, I think, is designed with this intention of helping unwind the sin. Right? So when we think about that, this is how Lewis envisions that there's repentance that needs to happen. And he sees that repentance, the transformation that comes, is becoming more and more solid. That's his metaphor, right? But it's a good one, right? They're like getting out of the bus and they can barely stand on the grass. It's so sharp, right? And what you see from the bright people is they're like, I'll help you. But just that alone is pretty hard, right? Some of these guys are. Our first guy he's gonna struggle with that. So here, just a couple of questions. I said, why do you think the grass hurts the ghost's feet? And what might that symbolize about the nature of heaven? Like, what is that getting at? Why does the grass hurt? Say that again?
Doesn't belong there. The ghost doesn't.
Yeah, right. It's not, or not yet, right? Yeah.
I think there's the denial of reality
Mhm.
aspect of the ghost. You know, form's there, but the substance isn't there, and there's the denial of reality. Like I don't want it to be real,
Yeah.
so I don't want to accept what's real. So even grass hurts because it represents what's real.
That's good. Yeah. Truth. Right? That's like, ouch. You're like, it will set you free. You're like, doesn't feel that way. Yeah.
It makes me think of the a small flower that you, like a scent of a flower that you haven't seen yet, or sunrise, sunset.
Oh, it's
is
the thing.
Yeah, it's the thing. Heaven is actually the thing. Is it Weight of Glory? Is that
Yeah.
what it is?
Yeah.
So in Weight of Glory, he talks about like, kind of like we get hints of things here. In the beautiful things that we experience here, they're hints of what's coming
Yes.
in heaven. And heaven is the real thing.
It's awesome. Were you gonna say something?
I was just going to say, like for me, I was thinking it's like the integrity of things. Like when it has integrity, it's more solid.
Mhm.
And we kind of, I sometimes think that we kind of are the matrix here. Like there's this big construct, and we
It
all
works.
like do this thing where we work from 9 to 5, and you know, it's kind of a lot of made up things.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, you think about that, the more like our worlds become virtual. And like, you know, you think about your kids playing games, and they're like, look what I got. And you're like, and then you turn the game off, and you don't have it anymore, right? It's this virtual thing that I have, right? And you're like, well, you don't like. Anyway, no, it's good. Yeah, Michelle.
This was one of my favorite parts of the book so far.
Yeah.
Is this physicality of heaven, and that everything, it's just, it really matters. It really has emphasis. Like the solid people can crush the grass, right? And
Yes.
these phantoms, you know, or the ghosts, they can't even walk on the grass, right? And so I just thought of that like as this weight. It reminded me of like this weight of glory, like that the solid people, it's solid, like the spiritual aspects give life to
Yes.
the body, and that there's it's a physicality. They're not just,
Yes.
it's not only spirit, but it's real, like what you were saying, Priscilla. But I just thought that was such an amazing analogy, right? These ghosts that have no ability to make a consequence on the earth, like just the grass, like they're crumbling so they have no substance. But the solid people, like they have consequence, they have power, right? And they can get more and more solid, right?
Mm-hmm. It's awesome. Exactly. And you think about this, like what is happening. It's interesting to see our life as like preparation for this next, right? So you're going, in some ways, as you're experiencing glory here, something in you is transforming, right? So you're like, but probably something you don't fully realize until you step off the bus, right? But you're like, part of the work Jesus is doing in our hearts right now is helping us become more solid, right? And that's, and that you're right. Like Lewis is playing with that idea of glory, that tied to maybe that Hebrew word for glory, which means weight, right? So it's an interesting parallel that's there within Judaism, as it's going to say, glory is weighty, it's heavy, right? When God's glory is there, it's heavy. And he's going like, oh yeah, let's just run with that. So yeah, Andy.
So I just think of the element of fear that ghosts are aligned with fear, or the only power that they can't touch you, they can't do anything, they get scare the bejesus out of you if you allow it to.
Yes.
And the idea that we're called to be the fear not people, and so the more solid is it that the more solid we become, the less fearful we become.
Yes.
Maybe that's the answer to the last part.
Mm-hmm.
Why the ghosts are uncomfortable, because they're afraid.
Yeah. Well, and that, if like to rewind back to chapter 2, part of the need for that, he wants to create scarcity so he can create community so that they can huddle together when the darkness comes, right? So they're like, even down there, they're scared, right? They have this control, but they're living in fear down there. And then they come into this and it just only accentuates the fear. They're going to run back to the ability to make this house, but you get the feeling like the monsters can just walk right in, right? You're like, there's not this security that you want, but they're trying to create the illusion of security.
Kind of reminds me too, like the concept like God's wrath is really the same thing as his love. And the difference is like, do we experience him as such? Like, have we come into enough of his image to where we experience him as love, or like these guys, or are they experiencing him as wrath because they have nothing of him in them?
Yes. No, and that's, I don't want to spoil it, but there's one guy coming up where the solid person's like, let me heal this. And he's like, it's going to hurt. And he's like, yes, it's going to hurt. Right? That thing. And you're like, the wrath. You see it, but he's going, this is freedom. The guy's like, maybe tomorrow. And he's like, there's only like right now. There's only right now. So no, it's great. Well, here's, so my little, I drew that. No. This is my friend ChatGPT. I was like, give me an illustration, like these characters, right? And so it's pretty good, right? This is the big man right here. Can you see? Sorry if I'm, yeah. No, this is a guy, give me my rights. And he's the one we've been seeing all along. He beats up the guy in the queue. He's like this really aggressive guy. He becomes our first sort of character. And, in many ways, so he gets greeted by Len. And I was thinking, I betcha, I like these little questions that I'm saving up for Lewis someday. But I'm like, this has got to be the rich man and Lazarus. Because part of that parable, right, is you're like, who's this guy? Well, this is the rich man. Who's this guy? This is Lazarus, right? The person, the worthless person in that parable, Jesus gives a name to, right? The guy that everybody's enamored with, he can't bother to name, right? So you have the big man, and then you've got Len. And Len is a murderer, right? So the big man's better than him, right? Quote, "Look at me now," said the ghost, slapping its chest, but the slap made no noise. "I gone straight all my life. I don't say I was a religious man, and I don't say I had no faults, far from it, but I done my best all my life, see? I done my best by everyone. That's the sort of chap I was. I never asked for anything, and that wasn't mine by rights. If I wanted a drink, I paid for it, and if I took my wages, I done my job, see? That's the sort of man I was, and I don't care who knows it."
No charity for this guy.
and in some ways, this is a fairly extreme example, right? But I think a lot of times when you talk to people about kind of their life, it's some form of this is how they would describe themselves, right? Like how did you do in your life? And I think most of us would be like, I kind of feel like I did my best, right? I feel like I gave him my best shot. And in some ways what Lewis is saying is, did you? Right? Like, let's be honest, right? Probably none of us can say that, right? So this distorted form of justice, this guy is like the sort of extreme example, right? But he keeps saying that. I just want my rights. I just want my rights. And he means like what I'm due, what's fair. And so here he is completely offended by Len, who walks up. I said this, the statement, I did the best I could, and other lies we tell ourselves. Len's going to say, you weren't a decent man, right? And you didn't do your best. None of us were. None of us did. Lord bless you. It doesn't matter. There's no need to go into it all now. You, gasped the ghost, you have the face to tell me I wasn't a decent chap? Of course. Must I go into all that? I will tell you one thing to begin with. Murdering old Jack wasn't the worst thing I did. This is Len. That was the work of a moment, and I was half mad when I did it. But I murdered you in my heart deliberately for years. This is the confessional, right? This is probably like Len's going to say, this is why I'm sent to you here. This is why I've been sent to you now, to ask your forgiveness and to be your servant as long as you need one, and longer if it pleases you. I was the worst, but all the men who worked under you felt the same. You made it hard for us, and you made it hard for your wife too, and for your children. In some ways, you're like, forget the grass, forget the bright light, right? You're like, here's the pain. This is judgment, right? And again, you just see this throughout Scripture. Like, how do you get to avoid the judgment? And in some ways, you're like, you don't. If you read Scripture, you're like, who gets to avoid the fire? And the answer is like, nobody. We all like go through it, right? And so there's a sobering to this. But you also see this lightheartedness in Len where he's like, none of that stuff matters, right? That this whole way of weighing through things, he just feels free from. Yeah, go ahead. No.
I just think this is the big man's like last ditch of like pride, kind of, because he keeps going with the solid person at the end of his story, right? Like we're used to, doesn't he?
I don't think so.
Somebody
Maybe I'm
does. Somebody does, because he walks, I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah.
But I'm under the impression, I think it's this guy, that he keeps going with him. And I remember thinking, oh, that's just because you're like, the last ditch pride effort is like, I did the best I could, and now, but he knows he's a liar. He already knows that. Like, I just don't feel like you hold on to that super tightly if you really, unless you feel like you have to for some reason.
Yeah.
Right? And then later when he's like, I don't need charity, I'm not taking any charity, that's like, again, like pride, like I'm good, I'm not taking a break, I'm like earning this thing.
Yes.
Right?
Okay. You double check. But I think what happens is he has like one last bit of control, and it's his ability to refuse. And he clings to that. Remember that part?
In the end, still grumbling, but whimpering also a little as it picked its way over the sharp grasses and made off.
Yes.
I assume he's going with the solid person. You're saying he's not.
I think
He's going away.
But we don't know. Maybe he changed his mind. So, but so this is like when he, in the end, he realizes that like he doesn't have to go, right? That this guy is saying, I'll help you. And he's like, I don't want your help. And he's like, that's the only way, right? The only way in is me. I'm your guy, and I'll stay with you as long as I can. Like, as long as you need me, I'm here for you. And he realizes like, okay, I don't have to do this. I can just go home, right? So this is what I'm talking about, Patty, where he says, that's what I'll do. I'll go home. I didn't come here to be treated like a dog. I'll go home. That's what I'll do. Damn and blast the whole pack of you. In the end, still grumbling, but whimpering also a little as he picked its way over the sharp grasses and made off. This is what we're going to see. I'm not going to say that everybody gets stuck, because not everybody does, but most people go back to the bus, right? And I think that was, for Lewis, I think what he was trying to really explore there is why is the road narrow? Why is this so hard for people to repent, right? And I'm thinking, he's going, certainly, can you identify with some of this? I was thinking his sense of justice had become a barrier. This difference between justice and grace. Why grace being so offensive? Why is grace so offensive? Right? And I think this last part struggled with the idea of someone worse than you being accepted before you. I have my own theory about the entrance to heaven. That we get there, and like all the Christians that I have a problem with are all sitting at a table. And Jesus is like, sit down, Jeff. Right? Like, we're going to serve you a meal, and I want you guys to sort it out, right? When you're done, come on in, right? But like, get that stuff out of the way, right? And I'm like, these guys are wrong, you know? And he's like, more wrong than you, Jeff? Right? Like, I think in some ways you're like, this is the costliness of grace, right? Which is free, but that's part of what's so hard about it. And you see that for Jesus. I mean, it's like, if he's merciless with anybody, it's with the people that have been lavished with grace and then withhold it, right? And he would go, that's like the red flag, like, don't do that, right? Don't receive all this forgiveness and then exact justice on somebody else, right? It's like kind of all or nothing. Like, he's going to say, you can put yourself under the law. If you want to hold them to the law, then you stand under it yourself, right? Or you could stand under grace, but to realize for everybody else, right? Anyway, any thoughts on that, or the trickiness of that, the distortion of justice?
Yeah, just pride runs through it all. This guy's the
Yeah.
most prideful.
Yeah,
It's the epitome of pride.
yeah, yeah. They really all boil down to that.
Oh,
Seems
yeah,
blinded.
probably.
Uh-huh.
Different forms of it. That's all that.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Michelle.
He just reminds me of, something that's said later, just like, I don't know if it's in the next chapter, but just about, if you drink too much or you do this for too long, there's a point. And so it reminded me of the searing of conscience. And it was quite frightening because this guy, like, he can't, but I feel like I can totally relate. Like, he cannot see that he actually has done anything wrong, like, at all. Like, he's totally blinded by his
Self-righteousness.
own, like, self-pity and his own pride. And so he can't even see that he's he's just as guilty in another way, like in just another, you know, maybe not the same sin, maybe not the same type of, but he can't even see. And it's scary because, I mean, it just seems, I don't know, I hear things like that all the time, and things might even go through my head, like you know, in myself, like, I don't want to be, you know, that searing of the conscience. It just seems like he can't see it. He can't see what's being offered to him at all, because who would actually choose to just whimper and go back to the bus, like, instead of what's being offered, unless you just can't even see.
Yeah. No, you're right. And in some ways, like, it's just simply bias, right? Like how your pride creates this biased view that you constantly reinforce until you cannot see different, right? And I think you're right. You used a word where you're talking about, what did you say? Not insecurity, but anyway, you use a word along those lines, which I think is really true, right? Because you're going, there's a self-pity, thank you, right? And you're like, that sounds different than pride. And you're like, it's not. It's just, and like he's claiming justice, but you're like, he's a victim, right? This is self-pity, like poor me. And so he's built that justice thing to protect what he feels like inside. Yeah, Howie.
It feels like, so your third question there, it's like the fragility of the human, of humans. We constantly look at others and think, well, I'm not as bad as that person. Like that person's way worse than me. And so it's, or we always feel like we don't get what we should or what we deserve, when in fact what we deserve is exactly what we are getting. And so the fragility of our human, construct is that we think more highly of ourselves than we ought, which is why Jesus said, unless you become the least of these, you will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. So it's like we said, the pride. It's all about his pride. He can't let go of his pride and accept that free gift that's right in front of him. So he'd rather get back on the bus.
Exactly. Tarn. I remember we're saying this. It's a stupid Jeff thing to say as a youth pastor, but one of the kids was like, is it okay are you allowed to hate anybody? And I was like, you can only hate 3 people. That feels like the limit. 3. Like if you hate 4, you need to forgive somebody. That's just too many, right?
I have reminded Jeff, that's 4.
That's 4. You gotta let somebody go, like, dang it, I've used up my 3. Right? Like this would be how we kind of rationalize these things. I love most people. I just hate 3 people, right? And you're like, the truth is here, right? Like that's obviously false. And that's how relentless grace is, right? Is like nobody. You don't get to hold that against anybody. You're like, oh, right? So this is the slow work, right? That's not to be like, shame on you for holding that stuff, but you're like, in some ways you're like, oh, this is the stuff that doesn't belong in heaven.
Well, because oftentimes a lot of times when we're mad at somebody, it's because something of our pride got hurt. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times we're mad at people because they're really partaking in total injustice.
Yes.
Righteously. It's like righteous anger, right?
Yes.
But then we claim it or something like that. And that's where it goes wrong. But I mean, I think sometimes it's easy to be like, we just need in order to receive the grace, we need to just give the grace.
Yeah.
Get out of your own way. Stop being so self-absorbed. You're judgmental, they're judgmental, let's all just let it go, right? And you're like, except that's true. And it's also true when it's an actual grievance. It's not against your pride, it's against humanity.
Yes. And like you're saying, grace isn't you know what, I don't even care. You're in some ways it's what were you going to say, Priscilla?
Well, I was just going to say, just seeing those words juxtaposed like that, it makes me think about the concept of justice, and if there ever really is justice.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of one instance where you could say, I've weighed every single thing, because can't know every single
Mm.
thing. So
Right.
the scales are, grace is part of what you
Yes.
can see about.
Yes.
Mm.
Which is probably why Jesus is like, just don't.
Yeah.
Just like, no, let me judge this one. He's like, nah.
It's like I'm even thinking of people like you hear a terrible story, then you hear the person's backstory, and you're like, oh,
Every
right,
time,
like
right?
everything that gets weighed in.
Every time you're like, oh,
It's
okay.
never black and white.
No. All right. The bishop. This
I imagine him way younger.
younger. All right. I'll tell ChatGPT. Give me a little younger version. It would be like, no problem. No problem, Jeff. You're so brilliant. Yeah.
Claims so much wisdom, but lacks so much wisdom. I'm like, that's like 35.
Yeah. I think I see it as somebody who has arrived, right? Like this. I wonder for Lewis if he was like, here we're getting into what he was seeing all over the place. So I was telling Patty I was going to tell this story, and I've told it before in a sermon, but it's one that I really like. I have this weird affection for Christopher Hitchens. I would be so delighted to see him in, but he was a staunch atheist, right? Staunch. Although he said some interesting things towards the end. But I loved this one interview that he did with this bishop she was like, listen, we're not that different, right? And kind of going into this debate. Here she is, she's Christian, and he's this atheist, and she's like, I feel like we care about the same things like virtue and these kind of things. And she goes, I don't literally believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I see it as this really powerful metaphor that speaks meaningfully into my life. And Hitchens goes, well, I don't think you can call yourself a Christian then. Right? And you're like, this is Hitchens of all people. He's like, well, you're not really a Christian. And she's like, what are you talking about? He's like, I think if you don't literally believe in the resurrection, I don't think you can call yourself a Christian, right? And I was thinking, oh, this is so funny, like from the other side, right? But you see Hitchens going like, can we define our terms here, right? Otherwise, what are we talking about, right? And if we're going to have some sort of conversation, like I need you to either like be in this lane or in this lane, and I can talk to either of you, right? But this sort of blurry, it's all just a metaphor. He's going, I don't even know what that means, right? And I think this is what Lewis is spotlighting here, is that we can get in some ways so enamored with our intelligence, our open-endedness, our curiosities to explore these things, that at some point along the way, what he's going to point out is we lose our faith, right? And we don't even see it go, right? And so this guy is meeting with maybe a student or something like that, or maybe it was some sort of peer, but they had this falling out. And I was thinking, here he's going like this is a bishop, but in many ways he's like the scholar, and he's saying, oh, you became so narrow-minded at a certain point. Like you started holding on to these kind of literal concepts of heaven and hell. Right? And the guy goes, but wasn't I right? And he's like, oh, in a spiritual sense, to be sure, I still believe in them in that way. I am still, my dear boy, looking for the kingdom, but nothing superstitious or mythological. Excuse me, where do you imagine you've been? The man says, I see. You mean that the gray town with its continual hope of morning. We must all live by hope, must we not? With its field for indefinite progress, is in a sense heaven, if only we have the eyes to see it. That is a beautiful idea. I didn't mean that at all. Is it possible you don't know where you've been? Now that you mention it, I don't think we ever do give it a name. What do you call it? We call it hell. Right? And he's like, when the guy says this, he's like offended by like, come on, man, like go easy on this. Anyway, an interesting idea. And describing this sort of how we can tend to become so abstract with these concepts that they lose their meaning. They lose their grit. This idea, the loss of our faith, says we didn't want the other to be true. We were afraid of crude salvationism, afraid of a breach with the spirit of the age, afraid of ridicule, afraid above all of real spiritual fears and hopes. I'm far from denying that young men may make mistakes. They may well be influenced by current fashions of thought, but it's not a question of how the opinions are formed. The point is that they were my honest opinions. This is the scholar talking. I was being honest, sincerely expressed. And he says, of course, having allowed oneself to drift, unresisting, unpraying, accepting every half-conscious solicitation from our desires, we reached a point where we no longer believed the faith. This can be a lot of different things, I think. These sort of ways that you kind of little by little lose that sense of like the truth of this, the reality of this. I think I mentioned this, but and it's maybe urban legend, but the story goes that when they had built St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, did I say this to you guys the other day? That they said, oh, no longer do we need to say silver and gold have I not. And one of the priests or monks, maybe St. Francis, said, and neither can we say rise up and walk. Right? And to go, it's an interesting, like when we control this thing, we have this ability to like do this sort of on our own or create, like wrap our heads around this or, whatever that is, right? And to go, oh, where along the way did we lose the actual thing? Anyway, maybe that doesn't fit perfectly. So sorry if that was a confusing example, but I hear kind of the same thing. Like what happened to our faith? Like it was there, but somehow in all of this, we lost our way. I don't know. Can you relate? Does that make sense to you? Or does that, like, as you're reading this?
The modern spirit of the important thing is just to believe.
Yeah.
The object of your belief isn't what's important. What's important is that you have a faith that takes you forward.
Yes.
So the idea that it's the hope.
Yeah.
It's not the substance of the hope. It's just that you have hope. It's good for you.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Belief, right? It's the Polar Express. Just the bell rings, I believe. Yeah.
I hope I asked this question right, but one of the things that when I was looking back at some notes, I realized I should have brought it up the first time.
No, good.
But it's about those that are on the bus at all. Okay, there's these people that have moved out and they're out and out, and then there's this group that's at the bus stop. First of all, why are they there?
Yes.
But why would that bishop be on the bus?
Yeah.
He's so sure.
Yes. And that's a great question.
So, I really read this part. I thought, listen to that. I mean, I thought it was masterful the way he did the dialogue on that section you just read.
How would you answer that? Why do you think he's on the bus?
I guess he still realizes that even though he can make all those statements, there's something missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. And in some ways, I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? Because you're exactly right. Like in all of these cases, these people on the bus, there's still hope. Something got them on there, right? And you hear this guy his friend trying to access it. He's like going, remember when you had that faith, right? Or at some point a little bit later, he's saying, don't you want to be happy? Right? And the guy is...
He sidestepped that.
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly. Because he almost gets like, he reminds himself, oh yeah, I've got this paper that I'm writing. On what would Jesus have been like when he grew up a little bit, right?
That was it.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah.
But he also makes a statement. read my paper yet.
Yes, yes.
Hilarious.
You know, it's interesting, like, and this is just what pops into my mind. So, but I'm thinking of Screw Tape, and he's going like, in some cases, if somebody's really struggling, right, with their faith and they're asking good questions, don't come back at them with some theological idea. Tell them like, yeah, that idea you're thinking about, that's so hungry that you should not think about that on an empty stomach. You should go get something to eat real quick, right? And he's like, and then the guy goes and gets a sandwich and he's forgotten all about that thing, right? Then he's going like, problem solved, right? Like, rather than confront this thing, like you might awaken something. And so he's saying oftentimes like distraction's your best weapon. Like get him to think about something. So you're like, I think you're right. And I think maybe Lewis is even thinking about that idea of like this, even just the basic happiness. You're like getting back to something. For Lewis, he's going to say, all pleasure ultimately is God's. Even, and he's not trying to be controversial here, he would say even the pleasure of sin is because it was originally created as something good. So his whole idea is that Satan has made nothing. All Satan can do is break things, right? So if there's pleasure to sin, it's because that's part of the godly pleasure that has been twisted. So it's evil, but like on some level, didn't start out that way. And so that idea of like, when pleasure is a we fall for pleasures all the time that take us into really bad ways. So pleasure isn't a safe place per se for humans, but on some level, that longing for happiness is a longing for something good, right? And so I think that's kind of what his solid friend is trying to awaken. Like, remember happiness, remember joy, remember these things, remember the sweetness of faith as a child. Follow that thread. And he all of a sudden goes instead to this very adult, like, oh, I've got a paper to be read. I love this idea that there are, I mean, in a really maybe twisted way, that there's these like theological discussions in hell. So it's a hilarious idea, right? But you're like, what if that's true? What if they're sitting around talking about what must God be like? And you're like, look where you are. Anyway, some of it is, I think, probably meant to be a little bit humorous, but I think some of it is a real warning. Yeah, Michelle.
Just thinking about the spirit of the age and this, he seems to be like obsessed with this act of questioning, right? Like, and like no such thing as a final answer. To travel, hopefully, is better than to arrive. And it's like, it just reminds me of the dropping of the, like, keeping the indicator, but dropping off what's being referred to, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, what is that? Right, like thirst was made for water, inquiry for truth, right? That, no, inquiry, question for question's sake, right? Mm-hmm. Art for art's sake, like everything just, that is so much seemingly like the spirit of the age, like it is good just because it's good, but not because it points to anything else.
Yeah. It's really good. And I think this is part of discernment, what you're saying. Because there is another side to all of this that I think one of the things that you notice if you read scripture like cover to cover is you watch things shift and change. And certain things are appropriate here that all of a sudden God's like, that's no longer appropriate, right? And you're going, oh, well, what does this mean, right? Like Peter, he's going to say, take and eat. And Peter's like, no, right? And you're going like, oh, God is shifting some things there, right? So I don't think that Lewis is saying like, don't ask questions, don't be curious, right? Don't wrestle with these things. What would it have been like? You know, you think about understanding the complexities of a human being on the cross, or what Jesus went through when he's in the garden, or some of these things, to like imagine ourselves in those places. you're not like, oh, that's dangerous, right? I mean, well, it could be, but I think what you're discerning instead is like, do I want the truth? Am I like open to that? Or am I following instead something that's just a little bit more of like a kind of seductive impulse of like cleverness, or just sort of impressed with ourselves? Does that make sense? And I think we know the difference. Like there's a, where you just feel like, oh, this is so brilliant, right? And you go, oh, that's probably shaky. As opposed to a sort of reverent sense of like, I'm being shown something. If that, I don't know, were you going to say how you go, and then go ahead, Andy.
I think to your question, what stands out to me, and obviously Lewis is such a theologian, but it's like you're talking about the narrow path and the narrow gate. And not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will inherit the kingdom of heaven, even bishops who get lost and they miss the creator for the creation.
Yeah. I mean, as a pastor, this is like a great chapter for me to sit with, right? Because you're like, this happens, right? And you go to these you'll go to these gatherings and discussions, and this is going to sound so silly, but you're like, you don't even pray, right? You just talk about really heady things, right? And you're like, on some level, you're like, wait. Not that you have to like bow and pray before your meal, but you're like, we all believe this, right? Right? And I think sometimes you could sort of do it without, you can talk about God without really needing God to be there, right? And you just go like, anyway, what were you going to say, Andy?
Well, a comment and then a question with regards to, you were talking about the struggle, the importance of the struggle with faith, right? So the loss of faith, well, what do you mean by faith? Did you really have it? Did you lose it? Type thing. And I think about, Israel being the one who wrestles with God, right, and overcomes. He had to overcome to get the identity that God gave him. And that came with the struggle. Or the father of our faith is Abraham. I can't imagine a greater wrestling match than he had with his conscience of what he was asked to do. But what's helped me in that is like, what do we mean by faith? Because faith isn't just believing in something that you don't fully understand. This is where the question comes in. That word pistis helps me to understand. It means somebody who's convinced. And you can't be convinced of something if you haven't wrestled with it. Like I can accept something, but I won't be convinced of it unless I've really wrestled with it.
You know why. Yeah.
And the question comes in the standpoint that I could be fully convinced of something, but what do they say? The opposite of doubt it isn't faith; it's certainty.
Right.
So the question then would be, in that context, what's the difference between being convinced without being certain?
Yeah. That's. Well, I was going to say I do have an answer to that, but it's going to feel like just semantics and like playing with words. But I would say certainty, like philosophically, is like unquestionable. They would talk about it like they would use that term like indubitable. And instead, I think I like the word confidence, right? That there's a texture to confidence that just goes, this is unshakable for me. But it's not like you couldn't find some place to be like, okay, no, I could see where you could ask that, right? But you hold it with this sense of security, right? So anyway, but that can be fiddling a little bit. And I think a lot of times when people say certain, they just mean confident too. So it's, but yeah. But Descartes, he means something very specific.
Just for you, the previous slide, the title was Truth is Narrow-Minded. That seemed to me to be the perfect t-shirt.
Exactly.
That will get anyone, they'll look at that if they read it and they'll go, wait a minute, I got to think about that.
Yeah. That isn't a permission, that's not permission to be narrow-minded. It just is to say the pursuit of truth generally is, in some ways, you're zeroing in on something. Although usually, if we're honest, when we find something, it opens up like 2 or 3 questions, right?
But narrow-minded has got such a terrible
It's true. And that's what you hear him saying, right? Like, Come on, stop trying. This is so elementary, right? Like this, anyway.
There's just a protection of his pride in it, because he gets to talk like you've been talking, saying, let's just pay attention to what people do instead
Yes.
of listening to what they're saying,
Yes.
right? And because he's gonna just talk about it. He even leaves singing a hymn.
Yes.
Right.
Don't you love that? Right? He's like,
He's just talking about it, but
yeah.
not like living actually in any of the truth
Goes away.
things.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And so he's like, some of these quotes, and we don't have time to go through them all, but he's like, going like, don't you want the thing, right? I was thinking about, we were talking about this, Marcia and I, on Sunday, like talking about idolatry, right? And you're like, so many ways, that's what all of these things come down to, right? Is idolatry is like something that we're mistaking as the thing instead of the source of the thing, right? So talking about God is beautiful. But if you're not interested in finding God and you just want to talk about God, then you've turned talking about God into an idol, right? Any of these things that are sort of disconnected from that final source. So that's a great way of discernment, is to go, am I after that thing ultimately in the end, right? And again, it's where like even biblical knowledge or any of those things are there to lead us to God, right? So that it's through those things that we're getting to the source of those things. And that's always a good reminder, yeah. Sure.
Is he sort of implying, like I can't even imagine that, that we're not going to be able to think about a lot of things in heaven, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it seems like there's an implication. I mean, if we're going to find truth, right? Thirst finally quenched. But I mean, it almost seems like there's an endpoint to knowledge, right? Like it's a quenching, right? It's an arrival, right? And which the bishop does not want to arrive. He wants to stay in the constant traveling through,
Yeah.
right? And it just reminded me of Timothy. I'm forgetting which one, when it's like there's always this learning, but never an arriving at truth, right?
Right.
But I guess my question
That's great.
is just like, is he, how can we think about that? Because we all like to think about a lot of things, right? Like,
We don't understand. I mean, that in some ways you're like, this is again where we just have to in so many ways use our imagination. I was just reading this week and I thought, oh, it's such a great way of thinking about this, that all of these people, well, I'm thinking about this in preparation for the sermon Sunday, but you go, everybody that encounters the angelic, they encounter the presence of God, and they're there in the presence of angels and the presence of God. All say, number one, woe is me. But the angels all go, holy, 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 right? And what you get is this picture of this angelic host going like, oh my gosh, wow, right? So you're going, I think when we think of a finality, at some point, like now we see dimly, but someday face to face, right? And you go, oh, you get this feeling like you're gonna look at God and be like, oh, that's what you're like. Okay, well, like go on my Xbox and like, what do we do now? Like there's a harp, go and play that harp, right? And you're going, in some ways the response is like this eternal sense of like awe. So like the quenching, again, you're talking about something that's like, we've only got tastes of that, right? But to go, that sense when you've seen something for the first time and you're like, that's the thing, you get this feeling like the angelic host lives there, right? Which sounds pretty great, right? And you're drinking water and you're like, oh, like you're quenched, and to just go, somehow you're like eternally quenched. You're eternally in that like first drink of water where you're like, that's what I needed. So I don't know. Again, it's a little abstract, but it's kind of a cool window that the angels are like in their own sort of loop of adoration, right? And you're like, this must be how they're experiencing God. fresh.
That's not quenched or arrived. That's quenching, and
Nice.
it is an ongoing, living,
Yes.
you don't get, there is no end to that. You don't want there to be an end.
No. Right. That's
So,
right.
As
Yes.
far as the arrival, the trip and the arrival, the trip is being, you're going to experience that in eternity. You never arrive. You don't want to arrive.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So it's not, there's like not an end to it, but there's a finality to it. Yeah. Anyway, and again, that's like some of what's brave about Lewis in this is he's just sort of willing to jump in there and use his imagination, right? To just go, no, we don't understand, but we should try. We should try to think about these things. Here's the quote on happiness. I'm going to keep moving. Theological speculation over truth, intellectual pride. My goodness, so easy to. I mean, I won't tell you how many times I've been in conversations and I'm like, look, I've got degrees in this. I don't think I've ever said that out loud, thank God. Right? What's that mug that's like, don't mistake your Google search for my seminary degree. Right? But that thing in us, right, that like gets triggered or whatever that is. But again, there's an invitation there for me, right, that's going, the posture, how you hold this. But I think for all of us there's like a warning against mistaking the process for the end itself. The next ones that we've got are pretty quick. This guy, bowler hat guy, this is the apple stealer. And we've kind of seen, like a lot of his story, we've like already been, exposed to along the way, that he's the one who's trying to create a sense of scarcity in order to create community, in order to create a sense of safety, right? And this for Lewis, the guy gets rebuked, fool, put it down, you cannot take it back. There's not room for it in hell. Stay here and learn to eat such apples. The very leaves and the blades of grass and the wood will delight to teach you. And don't you love these things? Lewis has got these images, right? He's such like the whimsical guy. It's such a fairy tale world that the waterfall is going to start speaking, right? And we went and saw this one Lewis scholar. He's a friend of Mike McClellan, and he did this whole talk on Lewis and waterfalls. And they're like everywhere, right? And for him, he's like just like weaving through all this. And the waterfalls, just for Lewis, they always show up. And there's a sense of like God's grandeur in there. I mean, interestingly enough, I think the waterfall even looks like a crucifix or something like that. This living water as it's there, But all of these things, like the very leaves and the blades of grass and the wood will delight to teach you, right? And you kind of hear Jesus there going, even the rocks would cry out. That even the creation itself is alive and vibrant. And he's trying to take this little apple with him, and he can't even lift it off the ground. I love the image. I think it's in this section where Lewis steps on the river and gets knocked way down, right? Because it's like he can't even penetrate the water. And this is where now the hard-bitten ghost comes in. This is like the cynic, right? This is the guy who is jaded. I was thinking about this as we were in our last passage in Hebrews, where he quotes from Proverbs, and he's saying, like, God disciplines you as a child, so don't lose heart, right? And I was thinking, oh, this is the guy that's lost heart. And you might call this guy the hard-bitten. He's a bit of a conspiracy theorist. I guess I've seen about all there is to see. The solid person says, you don't think of staying. He says, that's all propaganda. Of course, there never was any question of our staying. You can't eat the fruit and you can't drink the water, and it takes you all your time to walk on the grass. A human being couldn't live here. All that idea of staying is only an advertisement stunt. He talks about they, like this is a whole sort of conspiracy against me. And it reminds me, I used to love that show House. Did any of you watch that show House? It's Sherlock Holmes, but medicine. And one time House has got this child preacher that's his patient. Does any of you remember this one? And as he's working on it, these kind of miraculous things start happening. And so he doesn't know who it is, but somebody writes on this whiteboard, like House, and then on the other side, God. And every time House gets a point that he like, we don't know who it is that's doing this, is keeping score, gives a point to House, but then he keeps giving these points to God. And it's like infuriating House, right? Because Dr. House. And finally at the end, the Watson character says to him, you know, House, you can't disbelieve God and be mad at him at the same time. Right? It's like a great line. Like, you can't do both of those. You can disbelieve God or you can be mad at him, but you can't be both. And in some ways I was thinking, this is kind of the guy who's mad at God. Like, yeah, maybe there is a God, but if there is, he's not good. Right? And for whatever reason, this is somebody whose their heart is broken, and they look at everything and they just see everything is unfair. God's out to get me. That kind of thing. So everything this ring, you know. But the ghost says to him, interestingly, what would you do if you had your choice? And this is the person, you know, this is a part of what's lost heart, is this refusal to take any sort of responsibility for anything, right? So the solid person is going to ask him, like, what do you want? What do you want? So there you go. So the ghost, with a certain triumph, asking me to make a plan. It's up to the management to find something that doesn't bore us, isn't it? It's their job. Why should we do it for them? That's just where all the parsons and moralists have got the thing upside down. They keep on asking us to alter ourselves. But if the people who run the show are so clever and so powerful, why don't they find something to suit their public? This idea of like what God is asking of us and our willingness, right? Or, as it turns out, our refusal. Anyway, interesting idea. Just kind of some thoughts. We're going to speed through. We've got one more ghost after this, and we'll have made it through our section. So good job, you guys. Everything's a scam, but it's interesting. Like, what does cynicism protect us from? And what does it cost us? Have any of you thought about that? Like, what is that doing? I mean, if you know somebody, do you know somebody like this? Maybe some of you are like, I know a friend, or I know this guy, right? But you're like, maybe some of us are a bit cynical. And I think, you know, there's a protection in there in some ways that maybe we don't realize. But I said,
Do you believe that people today are more cynical
yeah,
than ever?
yeah,
That's your question, right?
yeah.
I was asking you.
I don't have to answer. It's you have to answer. Brett, what do you think?
I think, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, somebody once said that to me. They're like, it was an interesting, oh no, they didn't say that to me. I was listening to an interview with Walter Brueggemann, and he was talking about the divisiveness. And the person was asking, why this? Why are all these issues magnified to such intensity? And he said something, I don't know if he's right, but I thought it was interesting. He said, most people are grappling with the fact that their life doesn't look the way they thought it was going to. We were told one thing, and we thought, if I just do this, then I'll have this. Some of it is just a world that's changing so dramatically. Some of it is like maybe some naivety on our part that we thought we were doing better than we were, or whatever it is, but you're like looking at a world and you're like, this is not what I felt like I was promised. Right? And so I think it is true that I think a lot of that cynicism comes out in some very different ways.
I think there's a self-protectiveness about it too, where no one wants to be thought of as the fool, right? Like if you hope for something that never comes, then you're foolish when it doesn't come. But if you're like, oh, I knew that wasn't going to happen,
Yes.
then somehow you're like elevated and it hasn't cost you anything.
Totally.
Well, I don't think it's, I mean, yes, I agree with that 100%. And it's not about looking like the fool, it is about being the fool.
Yes.
I'm the cynic. Like, hi, I'm the cynic. Like so like so many of those things, I'm just like, yeah, I've learned too much. I know too much.
You've said that before about knowing too much and it costing you, but
Yeah.
I feel like, what do we really have to lose? Like, whose
Right.
estimation of us is this all costing thing that we'd rather be right than to be like, what does it really cost us to be like, oh, I would rather be happy and hopeful,
Yeah.
and maybe look like a fool to some people, but where's my joy?
Yes.
Like, what makes me ultimately more
But-
fulfilled?
okay.
I love it.
I don't think it's the happiness. It's the question of what does it cost you? I think what it costs you is taking the joy of taking responsibility for something and seeing it through right or wrong.
Yeah.
If I don't take responsibility for it, I can't be held accountable for it.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
it costs.
Yeah.
I like what he says, what human can live here.
Yeah.
It's like, it's truthful, like humans can't live here.
Yeah.
And the cynic in him, like there is this offer of you may partake in the divine nature. That's what this whole journey is about. And the cynic in him is like, oh, no. But I mean, the thought of like denying such an offer,
Yeah. Yeah.
that of cynicism.
Yeah. Right. And you see the like elements of truth in it. Like he's right, but the hopefulness is gone, right? And the openness is gone. I mean, I can think of some times growing up where I was like the naive person in the room and everybody chuckled. And I was like, oh, that's embarrassing.
Was it the question you asked? Or?
Yeah, or maybe just a sort of belief, a sort of optimism. And you realize like, oh, I'm in a room of people that have like, they've seen much more than I've seen. And they're like, oh, isn't that cute? Like, right? And you're like, oh no, like, right, I've shown my hand. I should have like been a little bit more closed up or something like that, right? Because you're like, sometimes that optimism or that hopefulness, it's looked down upon. It's embarrassing, right? And yes. And I think in some ways you're like, trace these stories back. And again, remember like all the way to the start of what we were talking about, the unwinding, right? What you're trying to do is like unwind this cynicism because you're like, this is not a cynical person at birth. This is somebody who ended up in this really broken place. And seeing repentance is this way of unwrapping all of this to get back to the softness of that. So anyway, to restore that soft heart. The last one, her, the well-dressed woman. This one to me, I thought, oh, this is going to sound very snobby, but I was like, oh, this is so Newport Beach. Just kidding. That's what we say in Laguna. Like, oh, that's where the superficial people are. This is not true. Laguna is plenty filled with we have our own superficiality.
We stay in Costa Mesa, too.
Do you? The well-dressed woman. I don't want help. I want to be left alone. How can I go out like this among a lot of people with real solid bodies? It's far worse than going out with nothing on, would have been on earth, to have everyone staring through me. I remember thinking that when we moved from San Clemente to Laguna, and I was thinking, I think everybody in Laguna dresses up when they go to the grocery store. I was like, in San Clemente, they did it. They just like rolled in their sweats, and like not worried about it, and to just go like, oh, just that sort of thing, like where appearance matters a little bit more. Sorry if I sound judgy. I just mean it like in a sort of comical sense, but you see this of like how painful it is to be seen without a sense of appearance, and her just going like, leave me alone, right? So ashamed to be seen in this way. I wish I'd never been born. What are we born for? For infinite happiness, said the Spirit. You can step out into it at any moment, but I tell you, they'll see me. An hour hence and you will not care. A day hence and you will laugh at it. Don't you remember on earth there were things too hot to touch with your finger, but you could drink them all right? Shame is like that. If you'll accept it, if you'll drink the cup to the bottom, you'll find it very nourishing. But try to do anything else with it and it scalds. Anyway, an interesting idea. This is like classic Lewis. Like, you know what shame is like? It's like drinking a hot cup of coffee. He's just the guy. That's like how his mind works, But it's an interesting idea and something for Jesus that he certainly was an image that he would use. Good old James and John are like, we want to be your favorites. And he says, can you drink the cup? Right? And they're like, yes. And Jesus says, it's like, I love it. Jesus goes, you will. Right? And you're like, dun, dun, dun. Like, oh, and it's like, you can see them going like, actually, wait, can we think about that? Like, what did we just sign ourselves up for? It's like drinking this cup, right? But he's going, oh, that shame. Like, let it just burn out all that stuff. I like how he's going like, in a day, you'll laugh at it, right? In an hour, you won't care, right? But you're like, sometimes it's like that, where you're thinking, oh, this would be the worst thing in the world. And then you find, oh, it wasn't, right? Are you healed from that? And in some ways, you're like free of that thing that you thought, oh, if this comes out, people that are caught in sin and it just destroys their life. But you'll hear testimony later and they'll go, it was actually the most freeing thing. All the bondage I was in underneath all of that, to have that exposed and drawn out. Yeah, it was the worst thing in the world, but it's like where I finally like found my feet again, right? So you're going, this idea of the shame that holds this thing back, he's going, yes, it tastes horrible, right? But you go, just drink it, right? Don't you want to be happy? Like, what is on the other side of this? Infinite happiness. You can step out into it at any moment. This idea, I was thinking, she's not, the opposite of repenting here is hiding. It's different than some of the others. She's not arguing. She's not fighting back. She's saying, leave me alone. Which is a very, it's a different one in all of this. Why is it hard to be seen in our weakness or vulnerability, even by God? Just is so hard, isn't it? To like have God love us in that broken space. This temptation to hide. And to me, that's like the power of this book is in these kind of invitations, right? Where you're like, hopefully we don't read one of these people and go, that's totally me, right? Because you're like, these are all types. They're all carried a bit to the extreme. But hopefully with each one as we sit with this, as I'm thinking about this during Lent, we're in the season of Lent. And a lot of it is like what happens in the wilderness is we just get kind of stripped back and laid bare. And hopefully with each one, we're going like, oh, where am I rationalizing? Where am I justifying? Where am I hiding? Where do I find these things? And the vision that this hopefully is casting for us. What is on the other side of this? This promise of more, this greater vision of God's love, greater understanding of grace, greater freedom to live in that place. So we're out of time, but any last thoughts? Yeah, Michelle.
Just going back to the last quote, just because the last part of it with the woman and the scalding of that,
Yeah.
just that, when it says, drink it to the bottom, you'll find it very nourishing, but try to do anything else with it and it scalds. Just to reiterate what that, I mean, it's drink it, walk through it, like embrace it, expose it, don't hide it.
Uh-huh.
Is that what that kind of means?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So if you try to do anything else with the shame, like try to escape from it, maybe. I'm
Right.
just saying, what is that something else that you do with it? And I'm just thinking of hiding and like whatever it is, like, you know, whatever, like the vice is, it's never going, you're not going through it.
Yeah.
But he is saying to drink it to the bottom.
Totally.
Like actually, we don't, I mean, it just is a strange thing
Yeah.
to say, like drink the shame to the bottom of the cup.
Yeah. I've who was it, like W.C. Fields or one of those guys was like said, drink life to the lees. And he's like talking about like drink the bottom of the tea. Just drink all the stuff, right? And in some ways I'm like, it's kind of this image of like drink it all the way down. And I think in some ways it's interesting, like growing up in church and all of that, I can remember, one of the things that really my heart struggled with a number of pastors that fell that I sat underneath. That shook me. But what was even harder was to watch them like get like halfway through repentance and then be like, nah, I'm out of here. And to think like very few people would go all the way through that. And at some point they would be like, you know what, it's too much, right? And they could just go their own way, right? There was nothing holding them to that position. And to go that humility that just sat in that and let it like finish its work and to go, it's really hard. I think at first we're embarrassed and we're caught. And so we're like, okay, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? But you're like, at some point it gets to this where this thing in us is like, that's enough, right? Who do you think you are, right? And I think in some ways the repentance is like, just keep going, right? Don't stop. Go till that it's all out of there, right? I don't know if that helps, Michelle. Humility, right? That just drinks it all the way to the bottom. It's not the same thing, but I'm like so impressed with Toby's prayer where she would go, God, don't let me leave this situation until I've learned everything you have for me in this. Which is so brave to pray in the middle of suffering or trial. You're like, but it's smart. She's going, I don't want ever to come back here. Let me learn it all right now, right? So you're like, there is some self-preservation in there that's going, I don't want to ever have to deal with this again. So let's just finish it this time. But you're like, you see the wisdom of that there. And he's kind of saying like, let's be done with this, right? Let's let this thing go. So again, and we'll get this in a little bit more graphic of an illustration coming up, but the dying, right? In some ways you're like, it just is the metaphor where you're like, there's something in us that you're like, this thing's just got to go, right? And God's going, yeah, we need to kill that thing. What you find in that story is that like even that thing that's been killed transforms, right? There's so much beauty. Well, we won't say anymore because maybe you're not there yet. We did 2 weeks worth of stuff here. So you guys are awesome. And sorry if that felt fast. Sorry if that felt like a lot, but we're like fully up to speed now. Let's do 3 chapters for next week. Does that sound good? 9, 10, and 11. And so that will feel hopefully more bite-sized. It's, the artist is coming up, Kari. Oh, sure. It's because of the artist. You're like, I don't want to talk about giving up my art supplies in heaven. Like, no, thank you. No, we'll miss you there. Yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe if you are back after that, we can like retroactively. I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's a good one for an artist to talk about beauty versus your skill, your craft. Anyway, let me pray. We'll be done. Jesus, thank you that we get to do this. Thank you for a book that pushes us. Thank you for the pictures that it paints that help us see maybe little windows into our own hearts. And God, I just pray that you would help us to be good patients, that welcome your surgical tools to come in and do necessary work. God, pray that we would have confidence in that and trust your goodness, the outcome of these things being secure. And God, thank you for just the way that you work so brilliantly in our lives and in our hearts. We trust you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.